Emma Jacobs thought she was just another student navigating the pressures of university life. But when she started receiving attention from her professor, James Donovan, what began as innocent mentoring soon spiraled into a dangerous affair that threatened to destroy everything she had worked for. When Emma's private messages were uncovered, the truth about their secret relationship sent shockwaves through the campus, unraveling a web of deceit, manipulation, and betrayal. Would Emma find the strength to expose the truth, or would the fallout from her actions tear her world apart? At first glance, Emma Jacobs seemed like the perfect student. She was 21 years old, studying English literature at a prestigious university, and had already earned a reputation as one of the brightest minds in her class. Her professors admired her for her insightful papers, her ability to participate in thoughtful discussions, and her passion for the subject matter. Her peers, on the other hand, admired her for her warmth and kindness. Emma had a way of making everyone feel welcome. Whether it was a smile in the hallway or a kind word in the library, she had a presence that made people feel at ease. Her social media profiles were filled with pictures of her at academic events, volunteering at local charities, and attending school functions with her friends. To anyone looking from the outside, Emma's life appeared perfect. A young woman with a promising future, surrounded by a supportive network of friends and mentors. Her grades were consistently high, and she was often at the top of her class. Professors praised her work ethic, saying she had the potential to go far in her career. To everyone who knew her, Emma was an ideal student and person, a model of success. But despite the outward perfection, there was something about Emma that wasn't quite right. She was always so busy, so focused. But there was a certain sadness in her eyes that no one could quite place. It wasn't obvious, but if you looked close enough, you'd notice it. A quiet intensity, as if she was carrying a heavy burden that no one could see. Her friends occasionally mentioned that she seemed distant at times, as if she was physically present, but emotionally somewhere else. But they chalked it up to the pressures of university life, knowing how stressful the workload could be. What no one knew was that Emma had been struggling with something deeper than academic stress. She had recently been dealing with a sense of loneliness and confusion. Though she had friends, Emma often felt isolated. She came from a small town far from the bustling university life, and while she enjoyed the friendships she had made, there was still a part of her that felt disconnected from the world around her. She hadn't been able to shake the feeling that, despite her success, something was missing from her life. Her emotional turmoil grew worse as time went on. She began to spend more time alone, staying late in the library or in her dorm room, reading or writing to escape the thoughts that had begun to consume her. Her phone became a constant companion, filled with messages from family, friends, and classmates. But it was the silent conversations she had with herself that were the most unsettling. Emma had begun to question everything: her future, her place in the world, and her own worth. Despite the facade of success she maintained, she was falling apart on the inside. It was during this time of emotional vulnerability that Emma began to look to someone for solace. She found an unexpected connection with one of her professors, James Donovan. He was a well-respected figure in the university, known for his sharp intellect and approachable demeanor. Professor Donovan had been Emma's mentor for some time, guiding her through the academic challenges that came with the rigors of university life. But over time, their conversations began to extend beyond coursework. They discussed literature, personal philosophies, and even life itself. In him, Emma found someone who seemed to understand her in ways others didn't. He was patient, thoughtful, and always willing to listen. It didn't take long for Emma to find herself drawn to him. At first, it was the academic admiration she had for his expertise. But as their conversations grew more personal, Emma found herself feeling a stronger connection. Professor Donovan seemed to offer her the validation she had been craving, and for the first time in a while, Emma didn't feel alone. She began to trust him, confiding in him about her feelings of isolation, her struggles with self-worth, and her fear of the future. She thought it was just a mentor-student relationship, a safe space where she could unload her worries. What she didn't realize, however, was that their bond was about to evolve into something far more dangerous, something that would threaten not only her future, but the lives of everyone involved. As Emma's relationship with Professor James Donovan deepened, the boundaries between student and mentor began to blur. It started innocently enough, with a few casual conversations after class about literature, current events, and their shared interest in poetry. Emma appreciated the attention and validation that James gave her, something she had craved for so long, but never truly received from anyone else in her life. James, on the other hand, seemed to enjoy the intellectual connection they shared, often going out of his way to engage with Emma after class. At first, their interactions remained strictly professional. Emma would approach him for academic advice, and he would offer guidance in a calm, measured tone. There was nothing to suggest that their relationship could evolve into anything more. But as the weeks went on, their conversations began to veer off course. Emma, feeling increasingly isolated and vulnerable, began to confide in James about more personal matters, her struggles with loneliness, her difficult upbringing, and her overwhelming fear of failure. James, ever the empathetic listener, offered her the reassurance she needed, making her feel as though she was not alone in the world. It wasn't long before the dynamic between them shifted. Their talks became more frequent, often extending well beyond the boundaries of a typical student-teacher relationship. Emma would linger after class, hoping for a few extra moments of conversation, and James would invite her to his office for more private discussions. The line between mentorship and friendship became less clear, and Emma found herself looking forward to their interactions more and more. Gradually, subtle shifts in their conversations began to occur. What once began as academic discussions about literature slowly turned into personal exchanges, with James offering compliments about Emma's intellect and beauty. He would compliment the way she expressed herself, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about her favorite books, and how much he appreciated her passion. Emma, in turn, began to feel more special in his presence. His attention was different from anything she had experienced before. It was personal and intense, and for the first time, Emma felt seen, not just as a student, but as an individual, as someone worthy of admiration. The tipping point came when James invited Emma to meet him outside of class. He suggested they grab coffee to discuss an upcoming paper she was working on. Emma, thrilled at the opportunity to spend more time with him, agreed. The conversation started with academic matters, but soon they were talking about more intimate topics. Emma's fears about her future, her doubts about her career, and her growing sense of inadequacy. James, again, was a patient listener, offering her a shoulder to lean on. He was kind, thoughtful, and made her feel understood in a way no one else ever had. Over the course of their meetings, the nature of their relationship shifted further. Small touches, like a hand on her shoulder or a brief brush of the arm, started to happen in their interactions. At first, they were innocent gestures, just the casual physical proximity that one might expect between friends. But to Emma, they felt different. The touches lingered longer than they should have, and each one sent a jolt of excitement through her. She had never felt such a connection before, and it stirred emotions in her that she didn't fully understand, as may. Their connection deepened. Emma's feelings began to grow more complicated. She found herself thinking about James constantly, replaying their conversations in her mind, analyzing every word, every glance. She had never imagined that a professor would become someone so integral to her life. She wanted more of him, more of his attention, more of his reassurance, more of the connection that seemed to pull her in deeper and deeper. James, for his part, seemed to encourage these feelings. His words were often carefully chosen, making Emma feel as though she was the center of his world in those brief moments they shared. His praise felt genuine, and his compliments made her feel beautiful and desired. And while Emma's growing affection for James was rooted in the emotional support he provided, there was a part of her that began to see him in a way that went beyond mentorship. It wasn't just about admiration anymore. It was about something more intense, more personal. But as the days passed, Emma began to realize the dangerous territory she was walking. She had started to notice how others viewed their relationship. Whispers from classmates who saw them speaking too closely, lingering glances from students who seemed to sense that something was amiss. But Emma pushed these thoughts aside, convincing herself that their connection was purely innocent, that it was just a mentorship with a deep bond. She convinced herself that James, too, was simply a supportive teacher, someone who had invested in her success. Little did Emma know, the emotional intimacy between them was no longer innocent. What began as a mentor-student relationship was slowly evolving into something far more complicated and far more dangerous. What she failed to see was that James, too, was walking a fine line between the professional and the personal. Though he might have told himself that he was just being a supportive mentor, his actions were slowly betraying those words. And Emma, caught in the tide of her growing emotions, was about to be swept into something she wouldn't be able to control. The turning point came unexpectedly, and it began with something as simple as Emma forgetting her phone in her dorm room. She had been running late for a meeting with James, as she often did in those days, trying to balance her overwhelming academic workload and the increasing emotional turmoil she had been facing. She grabbed her bag, rushed out of her room, and left the phone charging on her desk, unaware that this seemingly trivial decision would set in motion the discovery of a secret she had worked so hard to conceal. Rachel, her roommate, was the one who found the phone. Rachel and Emma had been close friends since the first year of university, sharing countless late-night conversations and study sessions. They had a bond built on trust, and Rachel had always admired Emma's intelligence and dedication. However, over the past few months, Rachel had noticed that something seemed off with her friend. Emma had become more distant, less talkative, and her usual enthusiasm for school had started to wane. Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that Emma was hiding something, but she had no idea what. It was a cold Wednesday afternoon when Rachel, bored and waiting for Emma to return, picked up the phone to check a few messages. She didn't have any malicious intent. She simply wanted to pass the time while waiting. She scrolled through Emma's messages looking for something interesting when she stumbled upon a conversation that made her freeze. The names at the top of the thread were immediately recognizable: Professor James Donovan and Emma Jacobs. At first, Rachel thought it was just another academic discussion, but as she read further, Her heart began to race. What had initially appeared to be harmless messages about class assignments quickly turned into something much more intimate. Emma and James exchanged long, personal notes about their days, their thoughts, and their feelings. At first it was mild, compliments about each other's work, discussions about books and poetry. But soon the tone shifted. Messages that began as innocent banter gradually took on a flirtatious undertone. James praised Emma's beauty, her intelligence, and her inspiring insights. Emma responded in kind, expressing how much she appreciated his support and how much she admired him. As Rachel continued to scroll, she felt a growing sense of unease. The compliments became more personal, more intense, and eventually the lines between professor and student became completely blurred. James suggested meeting outside of school, under the guise of discussing her future career, but the tone of his messages suggested something else entirely. He encouraged Emma to come to his office hours, and their exchanges began to include late-night texts, not about academic matters, but about their emotions. There was talk of shared vulnerabilities, of personal struggles, and of an overwhelming connection between them. Rachel's stomach churned as she read the words, each message making her more and more uncomfortable. By the time she finished reading, she felt as though she had been punched in the gut. The reality of what she had uncovered felt like a betrayal, not just of Emma's trust, but of the boundaries that were meant to exist between a student and a teacher. Rachel sat frozen on the bed, the phone in her hands, feeling the weight of the secret she had just unearthed. She had known something was off, but this was something she could never have imagined. Her first instinct was to confront Emma, immediately to demand answers, but Rachel knew that would be impossible. She had no idea how Emma would react or whether she even realized the gravity of the situation. Would Emma admit to it? Would she deny it? More importantly, Rachel wondered if Emma had any idea just how dangerous this relationship had become. After several moments of internal struggle, Rachel made a decision. She had to tell someone, but who? Her mind raced, torn between a sense of loyalty to her friend and a sense of moral obligation. She couldn't ignore what she had discovered, but at the same time, she feared the consequences of exposing the truth. Emma's reputation, James's career, and their futures all hung in the balance. Rachel finally decided that the best course of action was to reach out to someone she trusted. A.E., close friend who had studied law. She needed advice on what to do next, but she also needed to figure out how to handle the delicate situation without causing irreparable damage to Emma or herself. The weight of the discovery felt suffocating, but Rachel knew that keeping the secret would only make things worse. Emma returned to the dorm later that evening, none the wiser to what Rachel had found. When she walked into the room, her eyes met Rachel's, and for a brief moment, Rachel could see the exhaustion in her friend's face. Emma had been carrying a burden too, though it was clear she hadn't fully acknowledged it. Rachel wanted to say something, but the words caught in her throat. How could she confront her friend about something so deeply personal? How could she tell her that the secret she had been keeping could unravel everything? The room was thick with tension, but Rachel stayed silent. She couldn't bring herself to say what was on her mind, not yet. But the discovery had been made, and the wheels of fate had started turning. The secret, once hidden in private messages, was now out in the open. It was only a matter of time before everything would come crashing down. The discovery of Emma's secret affair with Professor James Donovan set off a chain of events that neither Emma nor Rachel could have anticipated. The weight of the truth was a burden neither of them could ignore, and it quickly became clear that their lives, once predictable and stable, were now spiraling into chaos. Rachel, still reeling from what she had uncovered, knew she couldn't keep quiet for long. She had already confided in her law student friend, but even after hearing his advice, the decision of what to do next was agonizing. Should she tell Emma's family? Should she contact the university? The possibilities seemed endless, but each one seemed to carry a profound risk. In the days following Rachel's discovery, Emma became more withdrawn. She wasn't quite herself, distracted in class, absent-minded in their shared moments, and increasingly distant during their usual hangouts. Rachel watched her friend struggle, torn between the loyalty she felt for Emma and the knowledge of the dangerous relationship that was unfolding right before her eyes. Rachel wanted to confront Emma, to tell her that she knew everything, but there was no easy way to do it. Would Emma even be willing to acknowledge the situation for what it truly was? Would she deny it? Or worse, would she be defensive? Emma, on the other hand, was now fully aware that her secret was unraveling. After a week of feeling like she was living under a microscope, she grew more anxious. Every glance in her direction, every whisper in the hallways, felt like a judgment. She tried to keep her emotions in check, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to pretend that everything was okay. She knew Rachel had seen the messages, but they hadn't spoken about it yet. Emma's heart raced every time she caught Rachel's eyes, but neither of them said a word. The tension finally reached a breaking point one afternoon. Emma was sitting in the campus library, buried in her books, when she saw Rachel approaching. Her face was unreadable, and Emma immediately knew something was off. As Rachel sat down beside her, the air between them felt thick, charged with unspoken words. After a long silence, Rachel finally spoke, her voice calm but steady. "I know, Emma, about you and Professor Donovan," she said, her eyes never leaving Emma's. Emma's heart sank. The walls she had built around herself suddenly felt paper-thin, and in an instant, everything she had tried to hide was exposed. For a moment, she couldn't respond. The weight of the words hung in the air, suffocating her. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She had been waiting for this moment, dreading it, but now that it had arrived, Emma was at a loss for words. Rachel watched her closely, waiting for an explanation. She wasn't angry, at least not yet, but the hurt in her eyes was evident. Emma had been her closest friend, and to learn of the secret she had been keeping, the betrayal of trust that it represented, was devastating. "I didn't want to believe it," Rachel continued softly. "I didn't want to think you'd do something like this. But the messages, they were too clear. What's going on, Emma?" Emma swallowed hard. Her first instinct was to lie, to deny it all, to explain it away as something innocent or misunderstood. But she couldn't do that. Deep down, she knew that what had started as an innocent mentorship had grown into something far darker, something far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. The truth, as painful as it was undeniable. "Didn't mean for it to happen," Emma said, her voice trembling. "I didn't expect it. It started as just talking, you know. Just conversations about books, about life. He was always there for me when I needed someone to talk to, but it went too far. I got too close. And now, Now I don't know how to fix it. Rachel could see the raw emotion in Emma's eyes, the regret and confusion that weighed heavily on her. Emma wasn't proud of what had happened. She had never planned for this affair to become more than just a mentor-student connection, but emotions had a way of complicating everything. She was overwhelmed by the situation, and in her desperation for support, she had leaned on the wrong person. Now, there was no going back. Rachel sighed, her heart aching for her friend. She knew Emma had been struggling with her own demons, loneliness, uncertainty, and a lack of guidance. But what James had done, what they had done together, was something else entirely. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a breach of trust, an abuse of power. "What are you going to do?" Rachel asked quietly. Emma looked down at her hands, wringing them nervously. "I don't know. I've been thinking about it. I can't keep living like this, like nothing's wrong. I have to face it. I have to talk to him. But I don't know what will happen after that. If anyone finds out, I could lose everything." Rachel's heart went out to her, but she knew the truth needed to come to light. The affair wasn't just damaging Emma's future. It was jeopardizing everything James had worked for. This wasn't just a personal issue, it was a professional one as well. The power imbalance, the manipulation, everything about it was wrong. "What if you tell the school?" Rachel suggested carefully. "What if you report him? It's not just about you anymore, Emma. It's about protecting yourself and other students. You can't let this continue." Emma nodded slowly, the weight of the decision heavy on her shoulders. The future she had so carefully built was now hanging in the balance. She was no longer just a student. She was someone entangled in a scandal that could destroy her life. "I'll think about it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'll do what's right, but I need time." Time was something Emma didn't have much of. The wheels of the university system were already in motion, and soon everyone would know the truth. What came next would change everything. The decision was made. Emma could no longer keep hiding from the truth. The emotional turmoil she had been battling for months had reached a breaking point, and with Rachel's support she finally found the courage to take the first step toward confronting the mess she had created. That night, after hours of restless tossing and turning in her bed, Emma sat up and took a deep breath. She knew what she had to do. She would go to the university, report everything, and face the consequences of her actions head-on. The next morning she walked through the cold hallways of the campus, her heart racing in her chest. Every step felt like an eternity. She couldn't shake the thought of what would come next, the fallout, the judgment, the scrutiny. But she also knew she couldn't let this secret continue. Not for her own sake, and certainly not for the sake of anyone else who might fall victim to the same manipulative behavior. Emma walked into the university's administration building, the weight of her decision pressing down on her with every step. She took a seat in front of the dean's office, her hands trembling. She had reached out earlier to schedule a meeting, and now she was here, ready to come clean. But even with the knowledge that she was doing the right thing, her mind was clouded with fear. What would they think of her? Would they believe her? The shame was overwhelming. In a place where she had once felt confident and secure, she now felt like an outsider, out of place and ashamed of what had transpired. After a brief, Wait. The door to the dean's office opened, and a woman in her 40s stepped out. Her name was Dean Harris, a stern but fair woman known for handling sensitive matters with care. She greeted Emma warmly, but with a professional air, offering her a seat. The room was sterile, with its grey walls and polished wooden desk, and it seemed to amplify the tension that hung between them. "Emma," Dean Harris said, her voice calm, "I understand you have something important you'd like to discuss. Take your time. We're here to listen." The words felt like they were stuck in Emma's throat, but the moment had come. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The truth, everything, poured out of her in a rush. She spoke of the growing friendship that had turned into something more, of the texts, the late-night conversations, the emotional connection that had clouded her judgment. She explained how the line between mentor and student had blurred beyond recognition, how she had been manipulated by someone she once admired and trusted. Dean Harris listened intently, her expression unreadable, but Emma could see the slight narrowing of her eyes when the name Professor James Donovan was mentioned. When Emma finished, there was a long silence. The weight of her confession seemed to hang in the room, heavy and suffocating. The dean took a moment to gather her thoughts before responding. "Emma," Dean Harris began, her voice soft but firm, "thank you for coming forward. This is a serious matter. I want you to understand that what you've experienced is not your fault, but we must now consider how to proceed. You've made the right choice by coming to us. We will investigate the situation thoroughly." The relief that washed over Emma was almost too much to bear. It wasn't going to be easy, but she knew she had made the right decision. The truth was finally out in the open. But as the conversation continued, Emma realized that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be painful. There would be interviews, reports, perhaps even legal action. Her career, her future, and her reputation were now all at stake. The guilt and shame were still present, but they were tempered by the knowledge that she had done the right thing. Within days, the university took action. Professor Donovan was placed on leave pending an investigation, and Emma was assigned a counselor to help her navigate the emotional aftermath of what had transpired. The campus was buzzing with whispers, though Emma did her best to avoid the rumors. She stayed in the background, focusing on her studies and working with the administration to ensure that the investigation was thorough and just. What she hadn't expected, however, was the outpouring of support she received from her peers. Though some were too afraid to speak out, many others reached out to Emma, expressing their admiration for her bravery. Some admitted they had seen strange interactions between Professor Donovan and other students, but had been too afraid to say anything. They all voiced the same sentiment. Emma had done something that others weren't able to do. She had taken the first step toward breaking the silence and ending the toxic dynamic that had festered for far too long. The investigation itself took months, but in the end it revealed a pattern of inappropriate behavior on James Donovan's part. Emma's decision to come forward was the catalyst that exposed the professor's manipulation, and the university took swift action. Donovan was dismissed from his position, his career irreparably damaged. The news made headlines, and Emma's story became a symbol of courage, a reminder that those who hold power must be held accountable for their actions. For Emma, the aftermath was far from easy. She struggled with the emotional scars left by the affair, but over time she began to heal. She sought therapy and worked through the feelings of betrayal and shame. Slowly, she rebuilt her life, knowing that while she could never erase what had happened, she could choose to move forward. Years later, Emma would look back on that time with a mixture of regret and pride. She had been through something painful, something that no one should have to experience. But in the end, she had found her voice. She had taken a stand not only for herself, but for others who might one day face the same situation. And while the scars of that chapter would always remain, Emma knew that she had emerged stronger, more resilient, and more determined than ever to live a life defined by integrity and strength.